Chapter 27 A Game of Poker. Monday, September 17, 9 p.m. Vance and I went home after lunch, and at about 4 o'clock Markham telephoned to say that he had made the necessary arrangements for the evening with Spotswood, Mannix, and Cleaver. Immediately following this confirmation, Vance left the house, and did not return until nearly 8 o'clock. Though I was filled with curiosity at so unusual a proceeding, he refused to enlighten me. But when, at 8:45, we went downstairs to the waiting car, there was a man I did not know in the tonneau, and I at once connected him with Vance's mysterious absence. "I've asked Mr. Allen to join us tonight," Vance vouchsafed when he had introduced us. "You don't play poker, and we really need another hand to make the game interesting, you know. Mr. Allen, by the by, is an old antagonist of mine." The fact that Vance would, apparently without permission, bring an uninvited guest to Markham's apartment amazed me but little more than the appearance of a man himself. He was rather short, with sharp, shrewd features, and what I saw of his hair beneath his jauntily tipped hat was black and sleek, like the painted hair of Japanese dolls. I noted, too, that his evening tie was enlivened by a design of a tiny white forget-me-nots, and that his shirt front was adorned with diamond studs. The contrast between him and the immaculately stylish and meticulously correct Vance was aggressively evident. I wondered what could be the relationship between them. Obviously it was neither social nor intellectual. Cleaver and Mannix were already on hand when we were ushered into Markham's drawing room, and a few minutes later Spotswood arrived. The amenities of introduction over, we were soon seated comfortably about the open log fire, smoking and sipping very excellent Scotch highballs. Markham had, of course, accepted the unexpected Mr. Allen cordially, but his occasional glances in the latter's direction told me he was having some difficulty in reconciling the man's appearance with Vance's sponsorship. A tense atmosphere lay beneath the spurious and affected affability of the little gathering. Indeed, the situation was scarcely conducive to spontaneity. Here were three men, each of whom was known to the others to have been interested in the same woman, and the reason for their having been brought together was the fact that this woman had been murdered. Markham, however, handled the situation with such tact that he largely succeeded in giving each one the feeling of being a disinterested spectator summoned to discuss an abstract problem. He explained at the outset that the conference had been actuated by his failure to find any approach to the problem of the murder. He hoped, he said, by a purely informal discussion, divested of all officialism and coercion, to turn up some suggestion that might lead to a fruitful line of inquiry. His manner was one of a friendly appeal, and when he finished speaking the general tension had been noticeably relaxed. During the discussion that followed I was interested in the various attitudes of the men concerned. Cleaver spoke bitterly of his part in the affair, and was more self-condemnatory than suggestive. Mannix was voluble and pretentiously candid, but beneath his comments ran a strain of apologetic wariness. Spotswood, unlike Mannix, seemed loath to discuss the matter, and maintained a consistently reticent attitude. He responded politely to Markham's questions, but he did not succeed entirely in hiding his resentment at thus being dragged into a general discussion. Vance had little to say, limiting himself to occasional remarks directed always to Markham. Allen did not once speak, but sat contemplating the others with a sort of uncanny amusement. The entire conversation struck me as utterly futile. Had Markham really hoped to garner information from it, he would have woefully disappointed. I realized, though, that he was merely endeavoring to justify himself for having taken so unusual a step, and to pave the way for the game of poker which Vance had requested. When the time came to broach the subject, however, there was no difficulty about it. It was exactly 11 o'clock when he made the suggestion. His tone was gracious and unassuming, but by couching his invitation in terms of a personal request, he practically precluded declination. But his verbal strategy, I felt, was unnecessary. Both Cleaver and Spotswood seemed genuinely to welcome the opportunity of dropping a distasteful discussion in favor of playing cards, and Vance and Allen, of course, concurred instantly. Mannix alone declined. He explained that he knew the game only slightly and disliked it, though he expressed an enthusiastic desire to watch the others. Vance urged him to reconsider, but without success, and Markham finally ordered his man to arrange the table for 5. I noticed that Vance waited until Allen had taken his place, and then dropped into the chair at his right. Cleaver took the seat at Allen's left. Spotswood sat at Vance's right, and then came Markham. Mannix drew up his chair midway behind Markham and Cleaver. Cleaver first named a rather moderate limit, but Spotswood at once suggested much larger stakes. Then Vance went still higher, and as both Markham and Allen signified their agreement, his figure was accepted. The prices placed on the chips somewhat took my breath away, and even Mannix whistled softly. That all 5 men at the table were excellent players became obvious before the game had progressed 10 minutes. For the first time that night, Vance's friend Allen seemed to have found his milieu and to be wholly at ease. Allen won the first 2 hands, and Vance the third and fourth. Spotswood then had a short run of good luck, and a little later Markham took a large jackpot which put him slightly in the lead. Cleaver was the only loser thus far, but in another half hour he had succeeded in recovering a large portion of his losses. After that Vance forged steadily ahead, only to relinquish his winning streak to Allen. Then for a while the fortunes of the game were rather evenly distributed, but later on both Cleaver and Spotswood began to lose heavily. By 12:30 a grim atmosphere had settled over the party, for so high were the stakes, and so rapidly did the betting pyramid, that even for men of means, such as all these players undoubtedly were, the amounts which continually changed hands represented very considerable items. Just before 1 o'clock, when the fever of the game had reached a high point, I saw Vance glance quickly at Allen and pass his handkerchief across his forehead. To a stranger the gesture would have appeared perfectly natural, but so familiar was I with Vance's mannerisms, I immediately recognized its artificiality, and simultaneously I noticed that it was Allen who was shuffling the cards preparatory to dealing. Some smoke from his cigar evidently went into his eye at this moment, for he blinked, and one of the cards fell to the floor. Quickly retrieving it, he reshuffled the deck and placed it before Vance to cut. The hand was a jackpot, and there was a small fortune of chips already on the table. Cleaver, Markham, and Spotswood passed. The decision thus reached Vance, and he opened for an unusually large amount. Allen at once laid down his hand, but Cleaver stayed. Then Markham and Spotswood both dropped out, leaving the entire play between Vance and Cleaver. Cleaver drew 1 card, and Vance, who had opened, drew 2. Vance made a nominal wager, and Cleaver raised it substantially. Vance in turn raised Cleaver, but only for a small amount, and Cleaver again raised Vance, this time for an even larger sum than before. Vance hesitated, and called him. Cleaver exposed his hand triumphantly. "Straight flush, jack high," he announced. "Can you beat that?" "Not on a 2-card draw," said Vance ruefully. He put his cards down to show his openers. He had 4 kings. About half an hour later Vance again took out his handkerchief and passed it across his forehead. As before, I noted that it was Allen's deal, and also that the hand was a jackpot which had been twice sweetened. Allen paused to take a drink of his highball and to light a cigar. Then, after Vance had cut the cards, he dealt them. Cleaver, Markham, and Spotswood passed, and again Vance opened, for the full amount of the pot. No one stayed except Spotswood, and this time it was a struggle solely between him and Vance. Spotswood asked for 1 card, and Vance stood pat. Then there followed a moment of almost breathless silence. The atmosphere seemed to me to be electrically charged, and I think the others sensed it too, for they were watching the play with a curiously strained intentness. Vance and Spotswood, however, appeared frozen in attitudes of superlative calm. I watched them closely, but neither revealed the slightest indication of any emotion. It was Vance's first bet. Without speaking, he moved a stack of yellow chips to the center of the table. It was by far the largest wager that had been made during the game, but immediately Spotswood measured another stack alongside of it. Then he coolly and deftly counted the remainder of his chips, and pushed them all forward with the palm of his hand, saying quietly, "The limit." Vance shrugged almost imperceptibly. "The pot, sir, is yours." He smiled pleasantly at Spotswood, and put down his hand face up, to establish his openers. He had held 4 aces. "Gad, that's poker!" exclaimed Allen, chuckling. "Poker!" echoed Markham. "To lay down 4 aces with all that money at stake?" Cleaver also grunted his astonishment, and Mannix pursed his lips disgustedly. "I don't mean any offense, you understand, Mr. Vance," he said, But looking at that play from a strictly business standpoint, I'd say you quit too soon." Spotswood glanced up. "You gentlemen wrong Mr. Vance," he said. "He played his hand perfectly. His withdrawal, even with 4 aces, was scientifically correct." "Sure it was," agreed Allen. "Oh boy, what a battle that was!" Spotswood nodded and, turning to Vance, said, "Since the exact situation is never likely to occur again, the least I can do, by way of showing my appreciation of your remarkable perception, is to gratify your curiosity. I held nothing." Spotswood put down his hand and extended his fingers gracefully toward the upturned cards. There were revealed a 5, 6, 7, 8 of clubs, and a knave of hearts. "I can't say that I follow your reasoning, Mr. Spotswood," Markham confessed. "Mr. Vance had you beaten, and he quit." "Consider the situation," Spotswood replied in a suave, even voice. "I most certainly would have opened so rich a pot. I had been able to, after Mr. Cleaver and you had passed. But since I nevertheless stayed after Mr. Vance had opened for so large an amount, it goes without saying that I must have had either a 4 straight or 4 flush, or a 4 straight flush. I believe I may state without immodesty that I am too good a player to have stayed otherwise." "And I assure you, Markham," interrupted Vance,